Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Brian Bileci. I'm so glad to be with you guys tonight. And we are going to go ahead and study another lesson on Hebrew. Make sure that you hit like and subscribe. If you're ready to jump on, we're going to go right into a lesson that we look at in the Hebrew tongue, Lashon HaKodesh. And so we're grateful to all those that are watching tonight. And we're going to jump right into our lesson. All right, so we have some friends on Zoom, and also we have a wonderful audience here on Facebook, and so some of you might be watching on YouTube. We're just grateful you've joined us. Let's jump right into the teaching or lesson of looking at the Aleph Beit. And as we look at the Aleph Beit, we're going to take a look at the Hebrew language as it's written from right to left, and we're going to be looking at how the letters are written, how they're sounded. We'll kind of be able to play around with some of that tonight, so we're just so glad you have joined us. So as we start with our Aleph Beit, again, Aleph Beit, or the alphabet, is really the first two letters in Hebrew, Aleph, very similar to the Greek alpha, which it's probably that the Greeks borrowed from the Hebrew alphabet. And beit would be like the letter beta, or in modern Greek, vita, the second letter of the Greek alphabet. Again, probably borrowing from the Hebrew. So let's go ahead and sound our Aleph Beit 5 letters at a time, taking a short breath till we get to all 22 of the letters. Okay, so on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud. Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech. Ein, Pe, Sadi, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. All right. Tov Me'od. Very good. So we're glad that you have been able to at least pronounce those letters. Again, we have 22 consonant letters, and we're just grateful that as we study the Hebrew language, we're able to understand how these consonant letters work, especially since half of them are a prefix or can be used as a prefix. And we couple that with what we call a Nikud vocalization. Nikud vocalization are the dottings or pointings under the letters, so that we can read from one letter at a time, right to left, right to left. So as we're looking at the Hebrew letters and we're reading from right to left, we want to make sure that we can read using the vowel system that you might know as A, E, I, O, U, but we also have to know it sounds differently in Hebrew. It's like the Spanish, Mediterranean, or Middle Eastern vowel, which is A, E, O, U. All right, so we want to be able to sound these out. Now, what you might not be familiar with is the way the sounds work. And so let's just take for an example this letter here, the letter Aleph, which is the first letter of the Aleph Beit. You know, the Aleph is really the picture of an ox head and an ox head of strength. But as a letter, it is silent. It is silent. So we want to make sure that we know how to sound the letters, because remember, when we look at the Aleph, we said that the Aleph is silent, very similar to the 16th letter in Hebrew, which is the letter Ein, which is also silent. So because Aleph is silent and it's the first letter, it's the perfect one to use for structure to be able to give us sounds. Like the letter Aleph can have the kamatz underneath it, or a patach, or a chataf patach. So let's just look at the first example, and that's with a kamatz underneath. This little symbol that looks like a T, remember, is giving sound to the consonant. So think of the consonant as a shofar, but the vowel as the sound or wind that you blow through a ram's horn, a shofar. And when you are looking at the Aleph Beit, the Aleph, the first letter in the Hebrew language, is actually silent. So we have to keep in mind that this silent letter needs a sound. And the sound that we're using here is the kamatz. So let's take a look. The kamatz is actually a long ah sound. So we would have ah, ah. And this would be the sound. If you were to fill in the sound there, it would be simply AH, or an A sound. Again, the kamatz underneath would be ah, ah. So here's a long ah sound. You see the sound would be A-H. So take a look at this again. If you were to see an aleph with a kamatz underneath it, it looks like a T, all you're going to do is write on the line or sound out ah, ah. So try that. Try that at home. Try those that are watching online. We've got Vikas from India that is watching with us, and you've got some friends from India that are on Zoom with us. I know so far Joseph is on. I think Miriam might be joining us. And then from California and from our synagogue, we have Patricia that's on. So we're just grateful. So Vikas, shalom to you. And we again take the aleph and we just simply sound ah, ah. So I wanted to go slow tonight and just be able to see this. So we see here that the ah sound, like in the kamatz here, is going to give us a very simple sounding of the aleph with a long ah. Now, the moment we see just one line underneath, it's still going to be ah, ah, but it's going to be a little shorter. It's going to be a medium length. So instead of long, you see the line called patach, and it's ah. So we have ah, and we have ah. So this is going to be a shorter ah sound. The reason this is going to be important is because it's going to really help us pronounce the words in Hebrew from right to left, one consonant letter at a time, with its accompanying vowel that is usually underneath, or if it's not underneath, we find it to the left. But in this case, this line underneath, one line, is still an ah sound. So in the beginning, it probably doesn't make much difference whether you see this or whether you see this. The first vowel that we learned was with the long ah, and that is kamatz. But if you see this, it's still a ah sound, but it's a medium ah in length, and it is called patach, patach. Now we can shorten it even more. We can put two dots on the side, and it would be a short ah sound. Ah. So we have ah, and we have ah. So let's take a look at that. We have the kamatz, which is long. We have the patach, which is medium. And then we have the hataf patach, which is short. So now we have long, ah, medium, ah, and short, ah, ah. Let's try this again with another vowel. Let's go to the E vowel. So we would start with two dots that we would call tsere, tsere. So let's take a look at those two dots. Tsere, tsere. So tsere actually is an S sound, and we remember that the multiple dots look like eggs underneath the aleph, so we'll think of the S sound for eggs, and we'll know that multiple dots give us a E vowel pronounced eh, eh. So here we have the E vowel, but it's pronounced eh, eh. So two dots would be the long E, eh, and then three dots is actually going to be the medium, eh. So we have eh and eh, and eh. So that just gives us an idea of the E vowel having either two dots, three dots, and we can even start adding, again, the shava, just like we did here on the patach. We added two dots on the right. In this case, you're going to add the two dots to the sagol, and you're going to come up with a combination, and that combination is going to be Hatasagal. Hatasagal. Now, you might be familiar with the Hatasagal under the name for the word that we translate God. As in Genesis 1:1, Bereshit bara Elohim. Elohim. Very short E. How do we know that? Well, medium E's are with the sagol. But if I put two dots on the right of that formation of three dots in a downward triangle, I have another sound, and it's now even shorter than the sagol, and it is hataf sagol. Hataf sagol. So this would be Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So we see that there is one more option for the E vowel, and that is the reduced sound of the shva, shva. See how quick the E shows up between the SH and the V? Shva. We even put an apostrophe in the air just to indicate it's a short E sound. Sometimes it will give us a glottal stop called a shva nach, or a sounding shva called a shva na, shva na. And so the shva, two dots, we see under the word Bereshit. Bereshit. The Shva is pronounced under a first letter of a word. It can never be a glottal stop if it's a Shva underneath the first letter of the word. So it is pronounced as be, be. And here we saw that the prefix be means in, as in the beginning, or in the first, or at first, which is the first word you see, which is a connection of the prefix added to the word reshit, which is first. So notice reshit, if you take off the letter beit with the shva underneath it, it's reshit. And the sere is underneath the letter resh. Now, if we go to an I vowel, we have the hirik, and you can see the I vowel in the word reshit. So be reshit means in the first, or in the beginning, and reshit has under the letter sheen a hirik, one dot. So if we see one dot, we think of the dot on a lowercase I, which is above, but we turn the I upside down and we think of the dot underneath the aleph, either followed by a letter yud for a long E sound for the vowel I, or a medium E sound for the vowel I. So a, e. Remember, our sounds are a, e, o, u. So an I vowel is pronounced E, and there's either long or medium, both using the hirik, which is the E vowel, the I vowel pronounced E. So then we have, as we see the letter Vav on the second line, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Now typically the letter Vav is a V, the letter Vav, and is used for the word and because it's the Paleo-Hebrew of a hook, the ancient pictograph of a hook. And hooks two things together. We call that a conjunction, where boys and girls, we'd need vav attached to the second word. So you would say the boys in Hebrew, which boy would and girls would be very attached by the letter vav, and so you would have the idea of the yeled and the yalda or yeladot. So we have yeled, which is boy, and then or yes, with a boy, and then you have yalda, which is a girl, and you could say yeled ve yalda. So you'd use vav as a hook to be able to hook these two words together. Now, we actually can see that in many of the blessings, but we'll look at that in just a minute. So let's go back to the vowel that we're looking at here for the O and the U. We have O, which is pronounced O, and we have the U, which is pronounced U. So we're using a Vav. So in this case, we have the letter Aleph, but the Vav is on the left because we read from right to left. The only difference is there's a dot on top called a Cholam. Cholam Vav. Cholam Vav. So the Cholam is the dot on top of the Vav, and the Vav holds it in the air. If you remove the Vav, the dot is still in the air, but it's called a Cholam Chaser. Cholam Chaser. So we move the dot to the side of the Vav, and it becomes Shuruk. Shuruk, a long U sound, versus the three dots on a 45-degree angle underneath the Aleph. Not to be confused with the dots you see for the letter or vowel E, pronounced eh. We know that this unique combination is only for the medium U vowel, which is pronounced U and is heard in kubutz, both medium in sound, kubutz. So we have basically a system of using vowels that help us sound the words. And this is by using a formula that we often teach of taking one consonant plus a vowel for an open syllable or closed syllable. So I want to just show you one that we use every week, and that is shalom, transliterated shalom. But I want to jump instead this week to Baruch, my Hebrew name, Baruch, Baruch. And so when you're talking about Baruch, which is the letter Beit and a kamatz underneath it, notice the Dagesh in the center. The Dagesh, remember, is inside the letter Beit because the letter Beit is the picture of what? A house. So you can't have a house without someone living in it. Guess what? The Dagesh is in the house. The Dagesh is the dot in the center of the house. So therefore, we use the Beit for a picture of a house, but we also use the dot in the center of it for the strong B sound, and it's called a Dagesh. So think about it. This Dagesh is inside the house, so we use it for in. We use it for in because the idea of building a house is for people to come into the house, to come in. This is why we say Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That we want you to come. And when you invite someone to a house and you say Baruch haba, you're welcoming them to come in the house. So when we talk about the Dagesh inside of the letter Beit and know that it's a picture of a house, we have to keep in mind that as a pictograph, it's a house, but it's used as a prefix for coming into that house. Therefore, we use it as a prefix continually for that very purpose. Now, if we look at some of the blessings that we do at the synagogue, some of you might be familiar with these blessings. I want to jump to one that we say for reading the Torah. Reading the Torah. So we talk about blessing God in our Torah service. Now we have a starting blessing, Baruch et Adonai. Some of you might pronounce it as Barhu, but it's actually Baruch et Adonai Hamevorach. So we usually say Baruch all the time, like when we say Baruch Shenatan Torah, we're saying that God has given us the Torah, and we say that God is blessing us when we read the Torah and we finish our reading. So we bend our knee to him because we want to be blessed as we bless him. So for instance, the Torah blessing closes with Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet Vechaye Olam Nata Betochenu Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and life everlasting planted in our midst. So what is this beginning of this blessing all about? Well, when we say Baruch, which we learned here, starts with a open syllable and then proceeds to a closed syllable. When we look at this word Baruch, it's the letter Beit, but with a kamatz underneath it, and that would give us the sound Ba, Ba. And then the letter Resh, followed by a Vav with a dot on the side. Remember, we learned that there's two ways to use this Vav. When the dot is on top, we remember that the dot on top, it's like a bird in the air. So we go, oh, look at that bird in the air. And it reminds us of the O sound. When the dot's on the side, we think of the purse on a woman's side and we say, ooh, look at that nice purse. So when you're thinking of this sound, Ba, and then the letter Resh, which has a Vav with a dot on the side, it's a U. So Baru, and then we have the letter Kaf or Chaf, and it's Chaf Sofit. So we always are reminded that there are 5 letters that change the form at the end of the word. In this case, it's Kaf, looks like a backward C with a dot in the center. Or without it, without the Dagesh, it would be called Chaf, spelled KH or CH in transliteration. Or at the end of the word, it looks like this, Chaf. Now, it looks actually like an elongated dalet, to be honest. It looks like a dalet that the line went too long, like it planted itself in the ground. And that's actually very much the look of it in most fonts. You can see here letter Kaf or Chaf with the Dagesh in the center, or not the Dagesh, with the Shabbat in the center, just means come to a glottal stop. So instead of sounding another vowel after that letter Kaf or Chaf, Sofit, we actually just bring it to a glottal stop, and instead it just comes to a closing sound of Baruch, Baruch. Not Baruch with a K, Baruch with the KH or CH sound. Baruch. In this case, we've chosen to spell it as it's normally spelled with the CH at the end, but you could actually spell it also with a KH for that sound. Again, Nikud vocalization. With this vowel, we would either pronounce it with or spell it with KH or CH for Chaf. Chaf. So again, remember, all we need is to be able to have one consonant and the vowel underneath. So what sound is this? It's ah. How long? Well, it's the longest possible sound. Long ah. The moment we move from kamatz to patach, it becomes ah. A little shorter, from ah to ah. And then we can even shorten it some more to ah. So we have ah, we have ah, and we have ah. Just like we have eh and eh. So when we think of this language of Hebrew and we think about this word Baruch, I want to break this down some more, and this might be a little bit advanced for some of you. But some of you might have a Strong's Concordance in your house, and you don't really know how to use it. So I want to take you back to a verse in Scripture where God says in Genesis, the book of Bereshit. Remember, we learned Bereshit means in the beginning. The book of Bereshit is actually the way we say the whole book of Genesis. So Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, it says here in the complete Jewish Bible, now Adonai, which means the Lord, said to Avram, which is Abram, get yourself out of your country, away from your kinsmen, and away from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Literally, I'll enlarge your name. We'll find out that that's exactly what God did. And you are to be a blessing. He says, I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you. It says, by you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now in Hebrew, it says, nivrechu, nivrechu. Now, notice in red there, the letter beit, the resh, and the kaf, or in this case, chaf. It has a nun in front and a vav as a suffix. The prefix in front is for verb conjugation. The suffix gives me the gender and the number of who we're talking to. So nivrechu, the vav at the end, basically is telling me what it says here. By you all the families of the earth will be blessed. But that's actually not the way it should be translated. I know the Complete Jewish Bible is a wonderful messianic translation, and so is Tree of Life a wonderful translation, and many of the Bible's versions are wonderful translations. But this is why Hebrew changes everything, because if we were to actually look at the verb root, here's the root. In a Strong's Concordance, we have Baruch, Baruch, which means to kneel or bend the knee. To kneel or bend the knee, by implication to bless God. How do you bless God? by kneeling or bending your knee to God. But it's also to kneel. It can be used to praise, because many times when you kneel before God, you're praising God or saluting God or thanking God. Again, these are not the definition of the word. It's actually the translation in the King James Bible. So that just means KJV, King James Bible, translates this root barach, where we get Baruch. Baruch actually is translated these ways. Now, what's the connection between bending the knee? Well, look at the word for knee in Hebrew. The letter Beit, Resh, and Chaf Sofit with two Sagol vowels underneath the first two letters, reading from right to left. It would be pronounced Berech. Berech. Why don't you try that at home? Berech. Berech is the word knee. So what does Barach or Baruch mean? It means to bend your knee to God. So in the synagogue, we bend our knee to God when we're saying the blessing, when we say Baruch. We bow at Atah and we rise up at Adonai as a wonderful tradition to show that to bless God, we bend our knee to His will. He does not have to bend His will to us. Very powerful that the Hebrew way of understanding the word bless or a blessing is that we bend our knee to God. So what does it mean, niverchu? Let's go a little further and see what some commentary says about this blessing to Abraham. So a quote from Rabbi Moshe Yosef from an article on yourarmstoisrael.org on Nazarene Israelites. He writes this. Again, he's kind of a messianic rabbi, but he's writing on behalf of Nazarene Israelites. He says, well, in 5 places in the Talmud, Jewish commentary, and other rabbinic literature, nivrechu is translated as grafted or intermingled. In the Orthodox Jewish Art Scroll Tanakh series, I actually have Art Scroll Tanakh with me right now. In Volume 1, page 432, it is written, there is an opinion shared by the Rashbam, Hiskuni, and Da'as Zekinum, and quoted by Tur. And here's the statement, that the verb nivrechu in Genesis 12:3 is related to the root barach, the beit, the resh, the kaf. As in the Mishnaic term, meaning a term from the Mishnah, mavrik, meaning to intermingle or graft. The Hebrew word nivrechu is the nifal conjugation of the root word barach. Now, some of you are already saying, well, what do you mean nifal conjugation? What does that mean? Nifal. Well, we'll take a look at that in just a second. But just keep in mind, this is just commentary on the topic, and they're going back and forth between the idea of this root to bless, or even to be used to be blessed, as coming from an idea of intermingling or grafting. Well, let's go a little deeper and see what we can investigate, because it's not that I'm validating this commentary. What I'm saying is there's something we can glean from it. So it literally can be read, and in you all nations will be born through mixing. Again, this is a commentary that has an opinion from a Nazarene Israelite who happens to be a rabbi of that form of kind of Messianic Judaism. So it says, though Art Scroll series agrees in 5 places this word is translated mixed or grafted by the rabbis, and they say in Kiliam 7:1 or Sotah 43a. The Hebrew for blessed is predominantly yivrechu, not nivrechu. So what this is we're using the letter yud as a prefix of the root instead of the letter nun. So remember, we said out of 22 Hebrew letters, we know that 11 of them can be used as a prefix, as in Bereshit, as in the letter Beit with the Dagesh, and the Shva underneath it for Be or in. So we're doing the same thing when we talk about the letter Yud being used as a prefix or Nun being used as a prefix. Now, I can't break it all down today because this is very advanced Hebrew, but I want to actually really help you understand how Hebrew works. So commentary goes on to say, the basis of this understanding is generally attributed to certain Jewish sages. We were able to validate the existence of one such statement attributed to the Rashbam, who was, however, a rabbi known to have engendered controversy by his unorthodox views. So notice this. Some of this information that's been given to us by this Rabbi Moshe, who happens to be a Nazarene Israelite, a kind of form of Messianic Judaism, but not the same branch that I'm a Messianic rabbi under. There are some different views there. Again, not saying one is better than the other, but I'm just letting you know I'm not personally validating this. But one thing we did find out is that the person that could be validated that said these things has unorthodox views. So we keep going. Rabbi Yehuda Shaviv of Bar Ilan University in Ramat Gan, Israel, reiterates Rashbam's position with a different emphasis. Now watch this. This can be validated. According to the Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel Ben Meir, on the parallel verse 28:14 of Genesis, the meaning that comes to mind is to graft a branch, and the connotation is to bless by combining. In other words, the families of the earth will intermingle with your family, Abraham. Notably, Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra, very famous rabbi, one of the most distinguished Jewish men of letters and writers of the Middle Ages, takes exception to Rashbam's view, citing in his Shita Acheret to Genesis, a commentary on Genesis, he puts, a great scholar wrote in his book that they shall bless themselves by you, means to graft other nations onto your stock. What do we get from all this? Why did I go this route tonight? I want to show you this picture, which I believe will break down what it means to be blessed. Because to graft in, think about branches, think about Gentiles grafted in to the faith of Abraham. The idea is that to be blessed, not only do you have to bend your knee to God, but the imagery is like a branch that is connected to the blessing. Just like all of Abraham's descendants, being a part of his family tree, would be blessed by being connected to Abraham. So to be cursed would be like a branch cut off from the blessing. So what if we change blessing and cursing from thinking of it's some kind of blessing from God versus the curse being like almost witchcraft where someone curses you, and think of it just being something of a agricultural metaphor that we're talking about a good root system in the ground, the root system of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the tree growing to full maturity and growing branches that would be the descendants, just like fruits on the tree would be their children. We can imagine a tree with branches connected as a blessed tree that produces. But a cursed tree is when a branch is cut off. Just like a tree that couldn't produce figs, Yeshua, the Messiah, wanted to curse it and it would dry up from the roots. So basically, blessed is a branch connected to the blessing. Cursed means a branch cut off from the blessing. So now, that's a perfect example. Notice here at the tree, we have the center part of the tree says the word shoresh. Shoresh. So here's how Hebrew works. Hebrew is a root-based language. Every verb is based on primarily 3, sometimes 4 consonant roots. Or root letters. So the root, or shoresh, again meaning root, is primarily 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So these letters form a skeleton around which vowels are placed to form a complete word. So what we're going to do is, going back to this idea of nivrechu, which has the beit, the resh, and the kaf or chaf. We know that that's where we get this idea of being blessed. It's from this root. We actually can look at how verbs are actually formed, because again, this is a verb of to be blessed. And there are 7 what we call binyanim structures of a verb. And they're all based upon the word for verb, which is pei, ein, lamed. Notice that, pei, ein, lamed. So pa'al is the way it's pronounced for the 3 letters without any other added letters. So in the pa'al form, that is the most simple form you can put a verb root in. it's just considered active, or it can be mild, like in the verb to eat, which would be le'echol. Le'echol. That's the verb to eat. Achal. Achal is the root. The aleph, the letter kaf or haf, and the lamed would be achal. So we have, just in basic understanding, if I change the structure of the letters, taking the root, and I add letters or I move letters around, I'm actually changing the conjugation of the verb. We can go from eating to consuming or devouring food, or to feed or cause someone to be fed or cause them to eat. We say no longer eating. If you cause someone else to eat, we say feeding, like feeding a child. Or it could be even a reflexive form of the verb, which means the action is subject to itself. So subject acts on itself. So reflexive, like a reflex in your knee. If I hit your knee and there's a reflex that just does it all by itself, that means you're doing the action by yourself. You're the initiator. But the nifal form, which is again another form of pa'al, is just adding the letter nun in front. It is passive and mild, but sometimes it can be reflexive, meaning again the action is done by oneself. Pu'al is passive and intense. It means to be consumed, versus hufal, which is to be fed. Now, this is very confusing for some of you, and I'm not trying to teach the conjugation of verbs tonight. But what I want to show you is how this word to be blessed or blessed oneself, it's actually different from most translations. And that's because, just like Art Scroll says in its commentary, Genesis 12:3 should be seen this way. You, Abraham, shall be the standard by which people bless themselves. Bless themselves. In other words, they will bless themselves by you. Why? Because we found out that nivrechu is in a form where you see it is in the nifal form. Nifal. And the nifal form uses the letter nun in front as a prefix, and here we see it. Nifal is number 5. So just knowing that it's nifal form, you don't have to understand it yet. Just know that the action of being blessed is kind of passive. No one's forcing you to be blessed. It's a passive action. It's mild, but sometimes it can be reflexive. Now, I want to show you something, though, where the same kind of blessing given to Abraham is passed down in Genesis, we said chapter 28, verse 14, where the Rashbam quotes from Genesis 28:14, and we'll look at that tonight. It says, the meaning comes to mind to graft, obviously to be combining someone to the blessing, like a branch being grafted in. The main thing I want you to know is that in that version, or in that verse, it is yivrechu, not nivrechu. That's where the yud is in front of the root. And the yud in front of the root is not the same in context here, because we're talking about nivrechu, which is sometimes reflexive, but many times passive. But the other way we can see it is in one that is the hit pa'el form. Hit pa'el, where it's always reflexive. That means you do it upon yourself, which is why they say of Abraham that because of this, they shall bless themselves by you. So Abraham will walk in faith, and by his faith, people will bless themselves. So it's not that Abraham is actually blessing his children more than the families of the earth, the descendants of the earth, especially the Gentiles of the earth, are being blessed because they're blessing themselves. How are they bless themselves? They're choosing to act as Abraham acted. They're choosing to believe God like Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. So whether you're of Jewish blood or you're of Gentile blood, if you bless yourself, it's because you choose to see the blessing that Abraham received and be blessed just like him by blessing yourself. which means you're choosing to bend your knee to God, just like Abraham bent his knee to God. Isn't that a beautiful idea? That Gentiles can actually be grafted into the family of Abraham by blessing themselves through Abraham's example. Now, that's the reason why I wanted to talk about how this wilderness experience, I'll move my little picture out of the way there. When God delivered Israel from Egypt, as we've been talking about Passover, they went from Egypt to the wilderness to going to the land of Israel, the land of promise. Egypt was the house of bondage. The wilderness was a place of process, and Israel was the promised land. See, God wanted sons and daughters of Abraham that would be blessed, that would live by faith for their future. But when they were in Egypt, they were slaves who live in fear from their past. This is why God brought them through Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, so they could forget their past and never see Pharaoh's face again, and their sins would be drowned into the sea. The horse and the rider would be drowned in the sea, and so would their past be. Instead, in the wilderness, they had to choose to be servants, to learn to submit to God in the present. So, what does that mean? In Egypt, as slaves, they were victims with a victim mentality. In the wilderness, they were in a place of process where they're learning to submit to God in the present so they can have victory over the enemy, victory over sin, victory over bondage. So we go from victim to striving for victory to become a victor. How do you become a victor? You live by faith for your future, not live in the past, because you've learned God or learned from God how to submit in the present. You now are a victorious conqueror. Now, why is this important? Abraham was going to bless all the families of the earth, or they would bless themselves by Abraham's faith. So therefore, we need to operate as sons and not slaves. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Because remember, one of the most important things within the Jewish world, within Judaism, is the idea of the teaching of the Torah. So most of our learning of Hebrew comes from this ancient text of the Torah. And the reason this is important is because when people study the Torah, they actually feel like they're in bondage to these set of rules. Remember, the Torah starts off with the blessing of Abraham before it ever gives us the idea of studying within the Jewish world the Torah of Adonai. Because really, when it comes down to it, the Torah starts with a storyboard of Abraham before it ever gets to Mount Sinai. So if we were to actually take a look at our portion this week, I'm not going to get into a lot of the Hebrew of it yet, but if you look at the Torah of Moshe in Shemot or Exodus 21:1, the beginning of our reading, called Mishpatim, it says, "Now these are the ordinances which you will set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve for 6 years, and in the 7th year he is to go free without payment. If he comes in by himself, he is to go out by himself. If he's married, then his wife will go out with him. If his master gave him a wife, she bear him sons or daughters, the wife and her children will be her master's, and he will go free by himself." Verse 5 says, "But if the servant plainly states, 'I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I will not go out free,' then his master is to bring him to God. Then take him to a door to the doorpost, the mezuzah. His master is to pierce his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." Now remember, if you're living as a slave in Egypt, these laws, or the Torah, or the mitzvot, or the commandments, are grievous, because a taskmaster is making you obey them. But if you're choosing to be a servant of God in the wilderness, you're learning to submit to God in the present by studying the Torah. Therefore, when you live out the Torah by faith, you're becoming sons of Abraham. And it's not by law that you're righteous, but by faith in what the law teaches, so that you learn to submit by the law, but you live it out by faith. That moves you from victim to God's victory that you're striving for, to actually living as a victor, a victorious conqueror, and not a slave or victim with a victim mentality. So we don't obey these laws legalistically. We want to make sure that we're obeying God's laws from our heart. We want to serve God with all our heart, soul, and strength. We want to be able to understand the relationship we're supposed to have with God and not live as slaves bound to a bunch of rules or regulations. So I think it's important for us when we're studying the Torah to be able to read it in such a way. Again, we looked at this binyanim, menorah, where we had all these forms that were either passive, reflexive, or active. And we'll study more of that in the future to understand how to conjugate verbs, because that is important when you're learning Hebrew. But many of you that are watching tonight, you're wanting to learn the basics. So I took you very slow tonight, making sure that you understood the basics of Hebrew when it comes to just taking a consonant letter and sounding it out. Because if you don't understand the basics, you can't move any further. For instance, when we talk about a verb like for Shabbat, the sheen, the bait, and the tav, a commandment in the Torah is to observe or keep the Shabbat. But what's the purpose of Shabbat? The purpose of the Shabbat is to look at its root, the shoresh, which means to rest, to repose, to sit down and rest, to cease, to keep the Shabbat or Sabbath rest. And that is because here we have the idea of Shabbat, like the root Shavat, which means he rested. As it says in Genesis, God rested on the seventh day. So Shabbat is really all about rest. Well, if you didn't know the shoresh, you would think that Shabbat was about a bunch of rules. But remember, when God created the world, he created the world in 6 days, and on the Shabbat, he rested so that we could enter that rest and experience Elohim as our creator, to refresh and to renew the rest of the week. So the Shabbat is very important when it comes to that. Now, if you want to go deeper, the root is like yeshav, from the same family of root, which means to sit down as a judge or king, to dwell, remain, or abide or inhabit. So God, as a judge, sits down on his throne on Shabbat and reigns over his creation as Elohim, which is why the rabbis say Elohim doesn't just mean creator, it also means for him to sit as a judge. The root, yeshav, would also use the same root letters as Shabbat in lashevet. It's the lamed in front of the sheen, the beit, and the tav for lashevet, to sit down, in the infinitive form. And through the binyanim, we can actually conjugate. I can say ani yoshev, I sit. Or if it's a woman, she would say ani yoshevet, you. Ani yoshevet, again, it's I sit for a woman. Or you can actually say, we're sitting, anachnu yoshvim. And actually, if you say yoshvim, it's understood that anachnu means we, and it's implied. So we have to understand the breakdown. Like I could say, Abba Yoshev, Daddy is sitting, Papa is sitting. Abba Yoshev, Abba Yoshev. Or I can take it into a more intense form and say, Abba Shev, which means please sit down. Please, Daddy, sit. So important that when we talk about this concept of sitting and we talk about the root to sit down, we understand the Shabbat rest is to enter in that Shabbat rest. And that's why we say Shabbat Shalom, that we're wishing you a Shabbat rest, that the Sabbath peace will be upon you. So just remember, God wants you to refresh yourself or to enter into that rest of God. Normally, we say during the week, shalom, which really means peace or wholeness, but we're asking you, do you have peace or wholeness today? Or we say, shalom, shalom, for a perfect peace or a double portion of God's abundant peace. And remember, we even say shalom for saying, how are you? How are you? And so every time we come into a conversation with someone and we want to say, how are you? We actually go back to the idea of, do you have shalom today? Do you have the peace of God today? And when you say it to a man, it's ma shlomcha. To a woman, it's ma shlomech. Let's do that again. For a man, it's ma shlomcha. For a woman, it's ma shlomech. Ma shlomech. So we're going back to that idea of shalom. Shalom. So very important that we see that. Now, do you guys have any questions tonight?
Yes. In the Abrahamic blessing,
Yes.
so I will curse those who curse you. For this first curse, it is Mekalelka, and for the second curse, it is Aor. So what's the difference between that, Rabbi?
Very good question. So the question is basically when it comes to Genesis 12, 1 through 3, that there is a verb there for bless. But when it comes to the curse, there are two different verbs for the word curse.
Yes.
The idea is, I'll bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who even disregard you or treat you as if you're unimportant. So let's see. Okay, so I'll show you that in the Hebrew right now. That was a good one. Do you have another one too?
No,
Is
no,
it
no,
the
no,
main
no.
one? Okay, good. So and then Patricia, do you have any questions tonight? If not, I'm going to jump.
No.
You're good? Okay, I'm going to jump into the text here. So everybody sees this text here. We're in Blue Letter Bible, New King James, and I'm looking at Exodus 21, verse 1, and it says here, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. It says in Hebrew, ve'ele, and these, hamishpatim. Mishpatim are translated here, the judgments, from the word mishpat, or shafat, meaning literally judge. Asher, that which are who. And it says here, tasim lifnehem. So it says, these are the mishpatim, coming from the word mishpat. You see it here, mishpat. So just to show you the name of the portion we're looking at, here is shafat, which means to judge. So here we have the idea of to judge here. You see this? Judge, judge 119 times as a verb, judge as a noun 60 times, goes on and breaks it down. To judge, to govern, to vindicate, to punish, to act as a lawgiver or judge or govern of God or man, to rule, govern, judge. So that's the idea of these laws. These laws are meant to judge us, to rule over us, to give us instruction or guidance. Now, the actual passage we looked at earlier was Genesis chapter 12, the famous portion of the Torah that we call Lech Lecha. And it says here, Vayomer Adonai El Avram. Then it goes on to say, Lech Lecha. Literally, go to yourself or go for yourself, for your own benefit. Me'artzacha. Me'artzacha means from your land. Umi moladetecha. Umi moladetecha, very long word, a lot of prefix and suffix there. It says umi beit avicha. So it says from your, literally your country, and now from the house of your father. It says El haaretz asher artzeka. So this is one of the few times that we have the Dagesh inside of the Chaf Safit, and it gives us a K sound instead of the CH sound. So what we're going to do is go to verse number 3. Take a look at this blessing and curse. So we have here, let's see, I'm still there. Okay. We have here, ve avaracha. Or excuse me, va aravacha. So the vav in front is and, okay? The aleph in front is a prefix that means I will in the future. Here's the root. I should do it this way. Here's the root, the beit, the resh, and the chaf, which is for barach. You see here, barach, which means to bless. So he says, I will bless, right? I will bless you. He goes, I will bless, and it says, mevarechecha. So it says, I will bless those who bless you, right? And the who is the mem in front of the root. From me. Who is me. And then the vav with the dot on the side is for the and. Mekalelcha. So here we have to break down the root, and I will curse those who curse you. So if we go down here, we'll see curse. Kalal. We have arar. Here we have aor. Aor. This is the aleph in front of the root. We're only taking the first two letters of the root to use it. We're dropping the letter resh, and we're adding the aleph that means I will. Curse. So let's see what this one says. This one says curse bitterly, to curse, lay a curse on, put a curse on. Now if you go to the other curse, it's a little different. It's still translated curse, but it is a little different here. The root is translated curse 39 times, or 5 times as a light thing, or lighter. It's even translated 3 times to despise. So look what it says. To be slight, be swift, to be trifling, to be of a little account. A little account meaning you treat someone like they're of little account. To be abated, show oneself swift. Trifling, too trifling. Insignificant. So if you treat someone insignificant, or make them despicable in your eyes, or make it light, or like it's a light thing that God is blessing the Jewish people, it says here to be or make light. So if you make light of the Jewish people, you'll be cursed. If you make small the Jewish people, you'll be cursed. It says, or treat them as if they're trifling, or bring them into contempt, or if you despise them, or you esteem them as a light thing, you esteem them lightly, like you don't give them their full recognition of who they are, to be treated as light. So this is what's the idea is that if I will curse those who treat you lightly, or who treat you as if they despise you, or they're not giving you the full esteem you deserve. They're esteeming you lightly, but not in the full significance of who you are. They're treating you as insignificant or trifling. That's what that means. So I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, or who treat you as insignificant, that treat you as if they disregard you. So that's basically what that means in reference to the blessing and the curse. That's basically why the blessing is so powerful when it comes to understanding not only the shalom of God, but the blessing of God, to be blessed, to be a blessed one. The Jewish people are blessed. In fact, the Jewish people are kadosh. They are holy, or literally set apart as holy. So we got to make sure that we don't treat the Jewish people as unholy, because remember, this root, kadash, can be translated kodesh, like lashon hakodesh, a holy thing. So we can have a holy thing. We can have a holy place, just like adamat kodesh, the holy ground, or holy place, or holy of holies. And we learn that also we can have a holy person. For instance, the Ruach HaKodesh is a holy person. And when it comes to the Jewish people, they are considered kadosh. Kadosh. They are set apart as a people unto God. And they are blessed. Blessed. Baruch. Baruch. And we should greet them with shalom. Shalom. I'm going to, at this time, close out. If there's no other comments or questions, I'm going to close out with the Aharonic benediction. And so, number 6, 24 through 26, stretch your hands for the blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'nihuneka, Yisa Adonai v'lecha, v'asem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He shine His face upon you, be gracious to you. May He lift up His countenance upon you, and give you perfect peace. And Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. In the name of Yeshua the Messiah we pray. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. Shavua Tov, everyone, and Shalom Shalom until Shabbat, or we can say Shabbat Shalom. See you soon.